Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar in implementing the new GCP 3R guidelines. My name is Nitzan. I'm the Customer Success Lead at ADRES. So before we start, a little bit about us, about the ADRES company. First of all, can you move forward? Thank you. Forefront of biotech innovation, at the forefront of biotech innovation from therapeutic concept to market. We complete scientific, regulatory, QA, and CMC consulting and execution services of pharmaceutical and medical device companies. We specialize in complex regulatory challenges and work with agencies like the FDA and the EMA worldwide. Our relentless pursuit unlocks endless breakthrough opportunities for startups, especially in European markets looking to expand to the US. We stop at nothing to illuminate the path of biotech breakthroughs, ensuring your vision becomes a global reality. In addition, I encourage you to send us questions during this webinar, and we will have time for them in the middle of the webinar and in the end of the presentation. Let me just see if we can begin. I just wish to remind you that the lecture can be considered your annual GCP training, given you stayed through the whole session. If upon registration you marked that you're interested in the certificate, we will contact you in the coming weeks. If you missed this option, please email me, Nitzan, after this webinar will end. ADRES clients will receive a certificate automatically. So let me just present our president, Rivka Zeibel, and founders of ADRES. Rivka.
Thank you, Nitzan, and thank you all for joining us today on, I would say, exciting opportunity to discuss the implementing of the new GCP R3 guidelines. Some of you may remember that almost a bit more than 1 year ago, on the 18th of January 2023, I presented a webinar about sponsor oversight of clinical trials. The focus of the webinar was the sponsor responsibility over all aspects of a clinical trial. While in the previous version of ICH GCP guideline, the expectations were there for a sponsor to be able to ensure all aspects of the study conduct and are under control. It did not get into details of what those aspects and which tools should be implemented. In May 2023, the draft ICH GCP R3 guideline was published and enlightening us, giving detailed expectation with regards to the sponsor oversight and responsibilities of all parties involved. So let's dive into it. I would like just to mention before I go into the details that when I read the different sections, new sections of the guideline, I thought, oh, somebody took all our experience over the years of comments to sponsors, to clinical research organizations, to sites, and put them together, gave them the right wording and put them together into this version of the guideline. So that's why I said that it is an exciting opportunity, because I thought that that level of detail is something that we really in our industry needed. So what are the concepts of the revision? It is to facilitate innovations in trial design, technology, and digitalization, set a foundation for practical expectations based on thoughtfulness in the design and conduct, proportionality and risk-based approaches with a focus on quality, Themes running throughout the guideline are the words proportionality and fitness for purpose, and from time to time I will highlight those terms. The key changes are substantial changes in the organization of the guideline to provide a more user-friendly layout, principles of ICH GCP, updated and continued to apply across clinical trial types and settings. Annex 1 still addresses the same key concept, IRB, IEC, investigator, and sponsor, and new sections dedicated to data governance was added, which I consider that one of the most relevant and critical additions to this guideline, because until now there were no really good or well-defined requirements in terms of data governance. Coming from the GMP world, the manufacturing world, that is very obvious for someone who is involved in manufacturing and development of products, but the clinical section didn't have those requirements and details. Glossary was moved after section 4, followed by 3 appendices: the investigator's brochure, the clinical trial protocol and protocol amendments, and the essential records, which is new to the guideline. And it discussed both essential records for all studies and potential essential records. I want to mention here that through the presentation, I will give you some examples of our experiences related to the conduct and audit of clinical trials, and when relevant, it will be related to the new requirements of the guideline. In the investigator section, there is clarification regarding training requirements, training according to participants' expected role, not need to provide training for routine activities of the specific role. So for instance, if there is a role of a surgeon in the study, then all the routine activities of that surgeon are not described as requirement for training, but any specific activity that role needs to conduct is subject to training and documented training. The investigator should ensure the availability of training records. The investigator may delegate responsibilities to other parties. However, she remains responsible for those activities that are defined as the investigator's responsibility. And I will show you in a few slides an example of a case in which the investigator was not aware of that responsibility. So now, according to the guideline, is definitely clear that it's in a responsibility. The sponsor may support the investigator in identifying service providers. However, it is the investigator who needs to confirm the service providers under his responsibility. As an example, the pharmacist, central lab, imaging, etc. Requirements for investigator supervision of activities taken by delegated parties, for example, and that is a case of an audit that we conducted a few years ago for one of our clients. During a site audit in France, it was identified in the facility tour that the pharmacists are sharing credentials to dispense IP through the electronic system. This is not appropriate at various levels. It does not comply with electronic system requirements that state that each user has unique access to the system, and of course with the data integrity requirements, since there is no clear traceability between who actually performed the task and who is documented to do so. During the closing meeting, when we provided the PI with this observation, his response was that what happens in the pharmacy is not his responsibility. This is not correct. Everything that goes on in the clinical trial is the PI's responsibility, and now also the guideline says so. Sponsor oversight section was expanded in so many aspects that I will touch some of them. When reading section 3.9, it seems that all those activities are obvious, however, they were not detailed to this level in the previous versions. For example, 3.9.3 says the sponsor should determine necessary trial-specific criteria for classifying protocol deviations as important, meaning those that impact the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants and the reliability of results. Decisions related to the trial should be appropriately assessed for their impact on participants' rights, safety and well-being, and the reliability of trial results. Risk related to such decisions should be suitably managed throughout the planning, conduct, and reporting of the trial. So I am sure that all of you are conducting those activities, but now it is also defined in the guidelines that those activities should be conducted and when each activity should occur. So for instance, the protocol deviation, which is an important aspect of the conduct of the study, is something that it is recommended to determine prior to the initiation of the study, so that there is a guidance to all participants how to classify protocol deviations and what is their criticality. And I will talk about that in a few minutes as well. 3.9.5, the range and extent of oversight measures should be fit for purpose and tailored to the complexity of and risk associated with the trial. Again, the fit for purpose is mentioned here, and that means that if there is a critical activity that may have an impact on the trial, that should have oversight measures that can mitigate those risks, and other activities that are less critical or that are more of a routine nature, they can have less measures to follow them. The selection and oversight of investigators and service providers are fundamental features of the oversight process. Oversight by the sponsor includes quality assurance and quality control processes relating to the trial-related activities of investigators and service providers. And we will see later on specific requirements for the quality assurance and quality control oversight, with some examples that until now were not obvious. So for subsection 3.9.1, the sponsor should ensure that the trial design and trial conduct, the processes undertaken, and the information and data generated are of sufficient quality to ensure reliable trial results, trial participant safety, and appropriate decision-making. And examples of tools to achieve that are risk assessment prior to first protocol finalization, vendors selection and qualification and requalification, principal investigators selection and clinical sites audits, clinical operations and QA review of monitoring reports, selection and validation of computerized systems. For subsection 3.9.3, and I mentioned that earlier, the protocol deviation. The sponsor should determine necessary trial-specific criteria for classifying protocol deviations as important, i.e. those that impact the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants and the reliability of results. Protocol deviations are any change, divergence, or departure from the study design or procedures defined in the protocol and/or International Conference of Harmonization, GCP guidelines. A major or important protocol deviation are a subset of PDs that may significantly impact the completeness, accuracy, and/or reliability of study data, or that may significantly affect a subject's right, safety, or well-being. And we will see some examples of that. And what comes immediately to my mind are protocol deviations like having a clinical intervention prior to signing the informed consent form. The additional one which is considered major or important is overdosing of the product in the clinical trial. And we will have some additional examples in a minute. Minor, not important protocol deviation are a subset of PDs that may not significantly impact the completeness, accuracy, and/or reliability of the trial data, nor that may affect the subject's rights, safety, or well-being. Predefined PDs should be prepared prior to initiating clinical trials to minimize bias. And that means that sometimes there is no plan for protocol deviations. And then one investigator may consider a protocol deviation as a minor, and another one may consider the same one as major. And when it comes to the end of the study and the sponsor collects all those protocol deviations, it is very challenging to assess really the impact of each of them to the study outcome. And it is difficult to define which were major or minor, and how to report them in the clinical study report, how to report them to the regulatory authorities, and what impact do they have to the validity of the data of those patients which were subject of major protocol deviations, which were not addressed as major when they occurred. So that is a really important aspect that needs to be taken into account. And my recommendation, of course, is to try and develop such a document prior to the initiation of the trial. Previous trials, PDs can be used for reference. If you have a similar product or a similar population trial, that you can rely on the protocol deviations that were identified in those trials in order to develop a new one, that is, of course, that helps. So this table is an example of protocol deviations that were defined for a product and a study. And there are different protocol deviation categories, subcategories, the general description of it, and the classification. So if we take just a few examples here, we have the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and the general description is failure to meet inclusion-exclusion criteria. In most cases, that will be a major protocol deviation, and a participant that had a major protocol deviation like that should have been excluded from the study. Visit or procedure out of time window, assessment or visit performed out of window. In some cases, it might be a minor deviation. In some cases, it might be a major deviation because there is an impact on the treatment if it is out of the window. So that's why you defined in your plan which kind of out-of-window visit will be considered a minor one and which kind will be a major one. Missing lab results. Samples were not collected or that the test was not performed. Again, those might be minor or major. If the lab results are associated with any primary or secondary endpoint of the study, then it might be a major or even critical deviation not having that data. Another example, missing clinical data, procedures that were not that didn't occur or didn't occur on time. For instance, missing results of an ECG, quality of life questionnaire not done, missing height or weight measurements when those are relevant measurements to define your primary or secondary endpoint of the study. Informed consent not obtained or obtained after study procedures initiated. This is a major protocol deviation, for instance. Incorrect ICF version use or delayed reconsent. Again, that might be a minor or major depending on which were the differences and what is the reason for that. And the last one in this table is dosing and drug administration, misdose or over or underdose. Similarly, a case in which overdose was given, which again, according to the characteristics of the trial and of the drug, you need to define whether those are minor or major protocol deviations. If you have such a table prior to the initiation of the study, then that is a document that should be shared with the investigators, all sites, and the medical monitor and the statistician, so that all decisions are made based on this protocol deviation definition. For subsection 3.9.4, decisions related to the trial should be appropriately assessed for their impact on participants' rights, safety, and well-being, and the reliability of trial results. Risks related to such decisions should be suitably managed throughout the planning, conduct, and reporting of the trial. And the question is, when should risk assessment be performed? So usually following the development of a new clinical protocol prior to final approval of the protocol. As part of the development of the protocol, it is important to start development, the risk assessment. And during the writing, you can start identifying what may be a risk for the conduct of the study, either by not conducting appropriately the requirements of the protocol, or by not taking into account different mistakes that may happen during the conduct of the study. In addition to that, the risk assessment should be revisited prior to clinical study database lock to ensure that there are no other aspects that may have an impact on the risk of the study. And it also is triggered by protocol amendment or process modifications, system replacements or update, significant turnover of study vendor, major critical deviations, force majeure events, as for example, war, COVID pandemic, etc. And in this, for this point, I just want to mention that if you identify a major deviation or critical deviations that repeat themselves in different clinical sites, then that would require revisiting the risk assessment and risk assess that specific deviation so that you identify what potentially is the cause for that and see if you can mitigate that while that the study is still running. How should risk assessment be performed? So the FMEA tool, which is a general tool for risk assessment, is also appropriate for a clinical trial. Here there are some examples or ways to characterize that. The ranking may be like 10, which is a major impact to patient safety, e.g. life-threatening, or major impact to both data quality, integrity, and protocol compliance. The occurrence of that is very high. The detection, remote chance of detection, no known control available to detect failure mode or cause. And because of that, the ranking is high. And that means that that actually is a high risk to the study. Another risk, which may be considered to be moderate impact to patient safety or major impact to data quality, integrity, or protocol compliance. The occurrence of that is high and somewhat remote chance of detection, remote likelihood that current controls will detect failure mode or cause. In that case, the ranking is lower, and so on in the following rows. Another way in which the sponsor oversight section was expanded is to establish of IDMC or DSMB for safety and efficacy endpoints. And it is mentioned in the guideline that their function is to recommend to the sponsor whether to continue, modify, or stop a trial based on the outcome of the study, based on periodic review of safety data, and sometimes also of efficacy. The guideline now adds that were appropriate to establish an endpoint assessment committee to review important endpoints to determine whether the endpoints meet protocol-specified criteria. And the requirement is to have that committee blinded, even if the trial is not blinded, in order to avoid bias. And the idea here is to follow up the results which reflect the endpoint of the study. And if, for instance, there is a trend to having a high percentage of participants not meeting the endpoint, or maybe to identify that there is a challenge in the way the endpoint is being measured or followed up, then to do a scientific assessment of that in order to provide input to the sponsor. All that without revealing anything about the study the participants and who is on any arm of the study. Committees established for purposes that could impact participant safety or the reliability of trial results should include members with relevant expertise and with managed conflicts of interest, meaning that they don't have a conflict of interest with the study that they are invited to be part of those committees, have written operating procedures, meaning charters, both for the IDMC and for the scientific committee, and document their decisions, meaning that you have all the meeting minutes available so that you can assess their decisions and recommendations. Clarified expectations for centralized and site monitoring. This should be proportionate to the risk involved. And the sponsor should determine the appropriate extent and nature of monitoring based on identified risks. Factors such as the objective, purpose, design, complexity, blinding, number of trial participants, investigational product, current knowledge of the safety profile, and endpoints of the trial should be considered. And here I just want to say that that is something that I am sure that all of us do on a regular basis when we decide to visit or audit the specific site. It is based on some data, some information that we got, either a lot of PDs or a high number of recruitments or a high number of recruitment failures. So there are those reasons for which we decide to monitor and visit a specific site. What the guidelines says now, that you need to have a plan for that and to evaluate the different factors in order to decide which sites, how many sites, and what is the frequency of those monitoring visits. Investigator site monitoring. Monitoring may be performed in relation to the clinical trial activities at the investigator sites, including their pharmacies and local laboratories as appropriate. The frequency of monitoring activities should also be determined based on identified risk, as I just mentioned. Monitoring activities and their frequency should be modified as appropriate using knowledge gained. So, for instance, if you decided at the beginning of your study that you are going to monitor once every 3 months, and then you realize that when you get to the site after 3 months, so many things happen that there is no way you can really cover all what you have in your plan, then it might be that you will decide to reduce the frequency, to reduce the intervals between the monitoring visits to once every month or every 2 months, and also the other way around. If you decide that you will monitor your sites once a month and there is no so much work to do during that visit, then you can change your monitoring plan and decide to get to those sites once every 2 months. It also depends on the activities in each site, and the frequency of monitoring does not need to be the same for all the sites in the study. It depends on the complexity of activities in that specific site. Clarified quality control of sites. The quality control of sites other than investigator sites, such as centralized imaging reading facilities, including on-site and/or centralized activities may be undertaken and reported using a risk-based approach. Again, you have different service providers, and you have in the investigator sites also centralized imaging reading facilities, or outside the investigator site, centralized imaging reading facilities. You have laboratories, central laboratories. All those should also be monitored and audited based on a predetermined plan and based on the criticality of their activities and based on your experience with those service facilities. I will present later on an example of an imaging reading facility that had, during one of the audits, which unfortunately was towards the end of the study, a lot of critical findings that if the sponsor would have audited them earlier, some of them may have been resolved. The oversight section was expanded, clarified sponsor responsibility around the transfer of activities referring to service providers in general, rather than to CRO. So until now, revision 2 of the ICH GCP guideline specifically mentioned the transfer of responsibilities to a CRO. Now it actually expands that to all service providers. And what they said is that agreements with all parties involved in the clinical trial should be documented prior to initiating activities. The sponsor should ensure appropriate oversight or important responsibilities that are transferred to service providers and further contractors. This additional aspects of expanding the oversight of the sponsor, clarified sponsor responsibilities around the transfer of activities referring to service providers in general. A sponsor may transfer any or all of the sponsor's trial-related activities to a service providers, and now that is a very important part of this guideline. However, the ultimate responsibility for the sponsor's trial-related activities, including protection of participants' rights, safety, and well-being, and reliability of the trial data, resides with the sponsor. I don't know about you, but the number of times that we approach a sponsor and told them, but you need to ensure that your laboratory does the things as they should be, or that the courier that transport the material from one place to another has the relevant SOPs. And the answer by the sponsor is, but they have a quality system. I rely on that. There is nothing more that I need to do. And now the guidance says very clearly, it's your responsibility. You cannot just state that your service provider has a quality system. You need to actually ensure that they have that quality system. And that is written actually in this, as the last point in this slide. Any service provider used for clinical trial activities should implement quality management and report to the sponsor any incident that might have an impact on the safety of trial participants and trial results. The sponsor should have access to relevant information, e.g. SOPs and performance metrics for selection and oversight of service providers. Again, I don't know about you, but we know that different times we ask to see SOPs of the service providers before we engage them into a trial, and they are not willing to provide those. They say you can come and audit the facility or visit us, but they are not willing. את יכולה להגיד לו שאני בהרצאה? תודה. אם זה משהו דחוף. Sorry. So that again, it's now very specifically written and mentioning here. How to assess suitability, because it talks about suitability and how to the suitability and of the oversight. Site example, the sponsor did not verify warning letters, department list, and 483 forms for the site and PI as part of site qualification. The site had an open FDA form 483 and PI had a warning letter issued. This is an example of non-suitable, of non-suitable assessment of a site. And for a vendor, for instance, a service of medical monitoring was added to a vendor already contracted. The sponsor did not verify that the vendor has SOPs in place to qualify medical monitoring and to perform this service. The vendor provided a veterinarian with a performing medical advisor role. However, the activities actually performed were medical monitoring. The vendor did not have SOPs in place to qualify medical monitors and to perform medical monitoring activities. Those two examples are examples of sponsors that actually didn't identify those issues during the selection of the sites and of the vendors. And what the guidance says, you need to do a suitable assessment of your service providers, if those are clinical sites or vendors, to ensure that they have not only the appropriate knowledge, but also the appropriate people to perform the activities and the roles that they have in the study. I will now stop and see whether you have any questions before we proceed.
Okay, thank you, Rivka. It was very, very interesting. So in the meantime, I can see that we have 4 questions. The first one is from Jonathan. He's asking, is the classification of PDs as major, important, and minor, not important part of the GCP definition, or is there room for additional or different classification, e.g. minor, major, critical?
Okay, so actually I am used to define them as critical, major, minor, but the GCP guidance talks about major or important, minor or non-important. So that is the way that it is defined in the GCP guidance. If you consider the need to have also critical, I don't think that they will object to that.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question from Yael. She's asking, did you say that DMC should be blinded to study a study arm? If yes, how can they recommend it?
No, that's not what I say. Sorry for the confusion. The IDMC does not need to be blinded. The other committee, the scientific committee for endpoint assessment is the one that should be blinded.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Apparently that we have a few more questions. I'm not so sure that we're gonna have the time to answer all of them,
Ma-
We will
maybe,
try to make some of them in the end.
yeah.
We have 2 more questions. Should we give it a time and
Okay,
then
if
move
they are
forward?
quick like those, we can do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's straight. Merav is asking for section 3.9.1. You gave example, cleanups and QA review of monitoring reports. Is it a recommendation or mandatory? If mandatory, what is the expectations from QA, audit, sample review, etc.?
So I can go quickly back to that slide. If I am not mistaken, that is based on our experience. It's not mandatory. Just 1 second. I need to F the base 391, correct? Okay, no, those are examples of tools that we have experience with that I recommend to use in order to actually meet the requirements of this subsection. Nothing is, apart from risk assessment, all the others are mentioned in the guidance, but it's not mandatory. Definitely cleanups and QA review of monitoring reports, it's not a mandatory issue. You just need to ensure that you have the functions in order to review monitoring reports. Okay?
Okay. Let's see about the last question, if you think that it's not a very long answer for it.
Okay.
Yael is asking, should we audit each and every vendor or only the more important ones? How to differentiate?
Okay, how to differentiate it is very easy based on the complexity of the service that they are providing and the criticality of their service to the conduct of the study. Should you audit each and every one of them? If you ask me, not the guidance, yes. And I think that even the guidance is suggesting that. But if you have a plan of auditing actually of qualification of your service providers, and you have a good justification why you are auditing only part of them and not all of them, that will be okay. The question will come during the conduct of the study if you identify in any of them which you didn't qualify upfront, that they have major deviations or things, conduct which is not in accordance with what you expected, then you may want to maybe not to qualify them, but to audit them in order to assess that. Okay, so and just to add, for our clients, we definitely commend them to do to qualify all the service providers.
Okay, thank you, Rivka. I see that we have a few more questions, but we don't have the time for it at this moment. We will try to get back to it in the end of the webinar.
And
okay?
if we don't have time at the end of the webinar, we will take each one of the questions and we will provide answers and send to all participants.
Of course. And beside of that, you're more than welcome to email me. We will show the slide with my email. Can you see it now? Great.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome to email me, and I'll make sure that I will refer these questions to Rivka and get back to you. Okay? So let's move forward. For the ones that joined us in the latest stadium, first of all, welcome. A little bit more about ADRES. ADRES is a regulatory affairs consulting and execution firm. We provide complete scientific, regulatory, Q&A, and CMC consulting and execution services of pharmaceuticals and medical device companies. We specialize in complex regulatory challenges and work with agencies like the FDA and EMA worldwide. As I said, if you have any more questions, see my email below, okay? And in the end, we will try to get back to it. I wish you to enjoy the rest of the webinar and would like to welcome back Rivka Zeibel, our president and founder. Enjoy.
And another aspect of expanding the sponsor oversight is clarified safety assessment. The sponsor should aggregate as appropriate and periodically review relevant safety information. This may result in the update of the protocol and investigators brochure. Urgent safety issues requiring immediate attention or action should be reported to the IRB, IEC, and or regulatory authorities and investigators without undue delay and as specified in regulatory requirements. So in addition to the regulatory requirements to report any safety issue, the guidance also says specifically be aware of safety issues and evaluate them periodically. Don't wait until the end of the study or the end of the year for the DSUR. Look at them, and if there is something that needs to be reported, please do so. Clarified management of immediate hazard. Similarly to the safety issues, if there is any hazard identified, the sponsor should determine the causes of the hazard and based on this take appropriate remedial actions. The sponsor should consider whether protocol requires amendment in response to an immediate hazard, the information of the immediate hazard if required, and any subsequent protocol amendments should be submitted to the IRB, IEC, and regulatory authorities by the investigator or institution or sponsor in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. So it's not different from any adverse event or a safety issue, but now it speaks specifically about hazards. Okay, now clarified requirements in blinded clinical trials. In previous version, the only thing that was mentioned about blinding clinical trials was the need for coding, for a coding system. Now it says a process to blind the sponsor, staff, trial participant, and or investigator is appropriate to the investigational product identity and assignment to prevent and detect inappropriate blinding. A procedure and mechanism that permits the investigator to rapidly identify the product in case of a medical emergency where unblinding is considered necessary, while protecting the identity of the treatment assignment of the other trial participants. A mechanism that protects the blinding of the trial where a participant's treatment assignment is unblinded for the purpose of safety reporting to regulatory authorities and or IRB, IEC where appropriate. So what it says here is you need to have a plan in place for blinding and unblinding. We usually have for each study that is blinded a procedure, an SOP, which defines all those parameters and also who is responsible for each one of them. Expectations for sponsor processes from data capture to analysis. So I think that I mentioned that at the beginning that this is totally a new section and it is detailed, very, very detailed, something that we didn't see in the past, which it makes sense because it is all about data. The sponsor should ensure the integrity and confidentiality of data generated and managed. The sponsor should apply quality control to the relevant stages of data handling to ensure that the data are of sufficient quality to generate reliable results. The sponsor should focus their quality assurance and quality control activities and data review on critical data, including its relevant metadata, meaning to do source data verification and all the related activities. The sponsor should pre-specify data to be collected and the method of its collection in the protocol. Where necessary, additional details, including a data flow diagram, should be contained in a protocol-related document, what we call data management plan. The sponsor should ensure the data acquisition tools are fit for purpose and designed to capture the information required by the protocol. They should be validated and ready for use prior to the required use in the trial. And about the validation of data and the computerized systems that in which data is captured, there is a lot in this guidance, and we will get to that. Sponsor, okay, so that's continuation of data handling. The sponsor should implement measures to ensure the safe wording of the blinding, if any. Maintain the blinding during the data entry and processing. The sponsor should allow correction of errors to data, including data entered by participants, where requested by the investigators or participants. Such data corrections should be justified and supported by source records around the time of the original entry. And here I just want to mention two additional points. One of them is that all those corrections are allowed prior to database lock. After database lock, it is not recommended, I would say, to do any changes in the data. And secondly, that there should be a system that allows for audit trails, so that if you do those kind of corrections, that can be identified when reviewing the data and metadata. The sponsor should document the data management steps to be undertaken prior to data analysis. Prior to provision of the data for analysis, edit access to the data acquisition tools should be restricted as appropriate to the purpose of analysis. Different restrictions for interim analysis as compared to final analysis. And to have a process in place to report incidents. That means that when you are about to do the database log for your final analysis, all the provisions for edit access should be kept only for one or two people that are responsible for that, that in case of an incident, they can do some edits, but that should be based on a process which defines who can do that, under which conditions, who should approve that, and how to document that. The real world shows that you need from time to time to do those corrections after database log or during database log, and the procedure for that should be very well defined so that you can justify that. In summary, a well-developed data capture and analysis plan should be written to ensure data integrity. Expectations for sponsor processes for data capture to analysis, the computerized systems. While in ICH R2, ICH E6 R2 mentions in general the need to have validated computerized systems, this version provides specific requirements for use of computerized systems, such as have a record on file of the computerized systems used in a clinical trial, which define the use, functionality, and validation status of each system. And again, I'm going to the GMP area. As in a manufacturing facility, you have a list of all the computerized systems that you use in order to manufacture and control your product. The same in a clinical trial. You should have a list of all computerized systems used by the sponsor, by the service providers, by the clinical sites, and which system you use for which activity, what is the functionality, and the validation status of them. Ensure that access rights granted to investigator site staff are in accordance with delegation by the PI. For systems deployed by the investigator institution, assess whether such systems are fit for purpose or if there are known issues, they can mitigate it. Should be assessed during the process of selecting sites. Again, this is an important aspect. And as I mentioned before, for CROs and other service providers, that they are not always willing to provide you with all the information that you are requiring in the process of selection. The same happens with sites. I recently audited a site that when I said that I would like to look at the data that they have for specific participants of the study in their system, not in the system of the sponsor, they were not willing to allow us to do that. So that is something that you need to evaluate during the process of selecting sites to ensure not only whether they are willing to provide you with access to those systems, but also whether those systems are fully validated and there is evidence of that validation. Ensure process in place to inform the sponsor of system defects that may result in non-compliance. And here it says what I just said, that not always there is a collaboration from sites in order to provide you access to their systems. And the last point here is when a non-conformity is revealed in one site, ensure it doesn't occur in others. That's something, again, that we learned from our experience, that you identify a non-conformity with data. That is something that we have seen repeatedly. Ensure that it doesn't occur in other sites, and if in any case, ensure that you have a mitigation and remediation plan for that. Statistical programming and data analysis. The recommendation of the guidance is to read it in conjunction with ICH E9. The sponsor should ensure the appropriate and documented quality control of statistical programming and data analysis is implemented. The sponsor should ensure the traceability of data transformations and deviations during data processing and analysis. The sponsor should ensure that the allocation to or exclusion of each trial participant from any analysis set is predefined, clearly described, and documented. Procedures should be in place to describe unblinding. The sponsor should retain the statistical programming records that relate to the output, content, or used in reports of the trial results, including quality control and validation activities performed. I want to say here that until now, the sponsor relied on the statisticians without challenging the calculation and recommendations. It seems like the sponsor should have skills now, which were not required until now. And that sponsor oversight on over statisticians is a service provider like other service providers. And you need to ensure quality control of the statisticians, validation of computerized systems, data transfer, etc. That is really a point that I think that we all need to take into account, because we don't usually have the experience in order to really assess the the calculations, the services that the statisticians provides to us. And I think that that will be something that the industry will need to consider how to address this specific requirement, because until now we just relied on them. And when a statistician told us that we have a validated tool, I don't think that any of us went to evaluate that specific tool, how validated it was. Another topic that is new to this guidance is quality by design. And in quality management, it says the sponsor should implement an appropriate system to manage quality throughout all stages of the trial process. Quality management includes the design and implementation of efficient clinical trials protocols, including tools and procedures for trial conduct, including for data collection and management, in order to support participants' rights, safety, and well-being, and the reliability of trial results. The sponsor should adopt a proportionate and risk-based approach to quality management, which involves incorporating quality into the design of the clinical trial, i.e. quality by design, and identifying those factors that are likely to have a meaningful impact on participants' rights, safety and well-being, and the reliability of the results. And here again, the guidance suggests that we consult ICH E8 with regards to critical to quality factors. The sponsor should describe the quality management approach implemented in the trial in the clinical trial report, which is definitely something new. There is a section of quality control and quality management in the clinical study report that we usually actually documented there the oversight on a laboratory, but not the overall quality management of the study. And now that is required, meaning the plan for audit of sites and vendors, the risk assessment, the implementing what we have learned from a previous study to the current study. All that was not actually a standard in management of clinical trials, and now it is a requirement. So tools of quality management throughout the clinical stages, and again, those are the way that we define them, meaning myself and the team that we worked with, and with some examples. Risk assessment based on product characteristics, patient population, and previous study results. I will really quickly go to the link which present an example of risk assessment. As you can see, you have the category of the risk, which is patient enrollment, dropout, the risk itself. I will go through all the columns, and then we can take some examples. Risk, potential impact, potential cause, and then the occurrence, the detectability, severity, and the RPN number, and then the controls and additional mitigation actions. So that is the way that it is recommended to develop such a risk assessment table, in which you have the categories of the different aspects of the study. As I mentioned earlier, during the development of the protocol, you can start developing it, the risk, and then the potential impact, potential cause, and whether there are controls in the study, already and what are the additional mitigation actions that are needed. So I will read one or two examples. For instance, the first one is patient enrollment dropout. The risk is subject enrolled does not meet study inclusion-exclusion criteria. The potential impact, subject not qualified to participate in study, that may have an impact on data quality, integrity, protocol compliance, and patient safety. Potential cause, inclusion-exclusion criteria not clear in protocol, or investigator incorrectly applies the IE criteria due to a lack of understanding, incorrect data entered into the electronic data capture database. And the controls available, global medical monitor, reviews and approves inclusion of patients in the study, monitoring process, including patients' medical history review, edit checks of the data for incorrect data entry, sponsors training for the study team during the investigators meeting. Sponsor will include a checklist for the monitors to review patients' inclusion into the study, internal medical monitor review and confirmation of eligibility request. And I just want to say that the section of inclusion-exclusion criteria is always an integral part of any audit that we recommend to do in any clinical site, and that is subject for source data verification so that we are sure that all the patients in the study met the inclusion-exclusion criteria.
And that's an activity that we support in, right?
Yes,
Rivka?
that's definitely an activity that we're supporting.
With our clients.
Yeah. Another category is patient enrollment dropout, subject not properly consented before participation in trial or reconsented while participating in trial, inadequate subject consent prior to participation in trial, latest and correct version of informed consent document not being used at site, poor investigator. I think that it's not patient enrollment, but the IE as well. Something happened when I saved this document. Sorry for that. I will go to another one. Monitoring, inadequate site monitoring. Issues at site are not identified and or addressed in a timely manner. Patient safety, data quality, integrity, protocol compliance. Safety monitoring plan is inadequate and does not provide effective guidance to site monitors. Plan is not followed, or there is inadequate monitor training or exercise monitor turnover, or excessive monitor turnover. Monitor is unable to arrive to site due to emergency country limitations. And that is something that happened a lot also during some wars in Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, also in our area, in our country, there is a war those days, and some of the studies activities cannot be actually executed as required. So that is something that needs to be also taken into consideration in the risk assessment. I will continue to the next topic, otherwise we will be at the end of the webinar. Define the upfront list of protocol deviations and their category. So I have an example here. I will really go through that very quickly because we discussed that earlier. In the category of eligibility deviation, any deviations of inclusion and exclusion criteria is an important one. In the ICF, failure to obtain informed consent prior to initiation of study procedures is an important one. Missing original signed and dated consent form only a photocopy available. It's not important. And when I say important is equivalent to major and non-important equivalent to minor. And usually what you, in the comments, what you discuss is what is the impact of that in the inclusion of that participant in the per protocol or intent to treat population, which is a statistical assessment as well. So this table is a tool also for the statisticians. And we can continue with the presentation. Follow up on quality events throughout the study. Develop relevant SOPs for the quality management of the study. Develop routine audit plan and for cause audit plan. Update all plans throughout the clinical development phases as appropriate. In addition to the sponsor responsibility with regards to data governance, a new section about the responsibility of the investigators and sponsor was added. The aims are to ensure the data are reliable and protected. Key processes like randomization, blinding are adequately supported. And the concepts are the directed focus to systems and data that will impact safety and rights of participants and reliability of trial results and implementation of measures proportionate to risk. Different considerations between systems developed specifically for clinical trials and systems intended for use in clinical practice. Recommended comprehensive approach to computerized systems and tools, covering, among others, IT security, data protection, computerized system validation, user management, data validation, and review. So what I understand from this edition of the joint responsibility of investigator and sponsor over data governance is that there should be an agreement between those two when conducting the study. Otherwise, it will be really very challenging to run a study without that agreement. The following key processes should address the full data life cycle with a focus on the criticality of the data and should be implemented proportionately and documented appropriately. Processes to ensure data protection of trial participants' confidential data. Processes for managing computerized systems to ensure that they are fit for purpose and used appropriately. Processes to safeguard essential elements of the clinical trial, such as randomization, dose escalation, and blinding. Processes to support key decision-making, such as data finalization prior to analysis, unblinding, allocation to analysis data sets, changes in clinical trial design, and where applicable, the activities of, for example, an IDMC. Safeguard blinding in data governance, maintain the integrity of the blinding in the design of systems, management of users, accounts, delegation of responsibilities, data transfer, database review prior to planned unblinding database lock, and statistical analysis across the trial. Potential for unblinding should be part of the risk assessment. Data lifecycle elements are data capture, relevant metadata, including audit trails, computerized systems, security of computerized systems, validation of computerized systems, system failures and how to address them, technical support, and user management. And last is clarification regarding providing final treatment to investigator and participants. I left it to the end because we got that question so many times. A patient dropped the study and they want to know what they got. A lot of questions like that, and the guidance is very clear about that. It is added now. consideration should be given to providing the investigator with information about the final treatment taken by their participants for blinded trials and a brief summary of the overall outcome of the trial. Where this information is provided to participants, the language should be non-technical, understandable to a layperson, and non-promotional. The sponsor should only supply this information after the trial has been unblinded and all relevant analysis conclusions have been completed and finalized. So I think that it is very clear whether we can do that. Yes, you can do that, but only after the trial is fully ended, unblinded, and results are completed and finalized.
Okay, so shortly we're gonna end our webinar.
Yeah.
Now we have a few case studies that Rivka was preparing for us. Because we don't have a lot of time, we will give just a time only for one case study. If you can choose one, and then we will move forward with the questions.
Yeah, so I will go through that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the case that I mentioned earlier, an audit of a service provider, a centralized medical imaging company, that for which we had a lot of critical observations. And one of the observations was that data validation specification was not approved until after database lock, which is such a date. Lock authorization, lock and unblinded requests were executed on a date prior to the approval of the data validation specifications, and that is not in accordance to ICH E6 R3 section 4.2.3, finalization of data sets prior to analysis. Data review indicated potentially misaligned data. Values on images did not match values in the data export, and that is not according to sections 4.4 and 4.5 related to security of computerized systems and validation of computerized systems. Data integrity and source data verification was not followed. So those are examples of one of the case studies that I choose to show you today.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we should go to, if there are more questions.
There's actually quite a lot of questions over here. It's very...
So we will try in 5 minutes to answer as many as possible.
We shall. So we will choose a few, and as I wrote you in our chat, you're more than welcome to email me your questions, because we won't have enough time to answer all of them. We will choose a few. Our panel choose one, and it's from someone that asked anonymously. The question is, Rivka, in case of a small biotech sponsor outsourcing the study conduction to a CRO, at what level the sponsor has to verify all items mentioned, e.g. CRO will work with their preferred vendors. Does the sponsor has to audit them?
Okay, so if the CRO works with their preferred vendors, meaning that those vendors are qualified and approved vendors of the CRO, then this small biotech company, which is one of an example of all our clients, because we are working mainly with small biotech companies, then this company should audit the CRO, ensure that the CRO has appropriate qualification procedures for their service providers, and after qualifying the CRO, then that company can rely on those service providers. Of course, I would definitely recommend at least to have a quality person either within the company or to outsource that responsibility to a company like ours. And definitely that can meet the requirements of this of the guidance.
Okay, thank you, Rivka. One last question very quickly. Merav asked, for ongoing studies, should the new guidance must be implemented immediately?
I don't think, first of all, it is a draft. It is a draft, but we know that some authorities will start looking at things according to this draft, but it's not mandatory to have full compliance with everything. Although I must say that we have seen audit reports by regulators, not by companies like us, but by regulators, that they already are mentioning deficiencies as if this guidance was already effective, even before the draft was published. So for someone that is in this world for years, there is nothing new here. It's just that finally they put that in writing in a guidance document.
Okay. Thank you, Rivka.
Thank
So
you.
as I said, we saw all your questions. As you see, it's very important to Rivka to answer all of them fully.
Yeah.
You were more than welcome to email me. We'll do our best to answer you. I wish to remind you that this lecture can be considered your annual GCP training, given you stayed through the whole session. If you, upon registration, you mark that you're interested in this certificate, we will contact you in the upcoming weeks. If you miss this option, please email me over here. If you can, as you can see, great.
Yeah.
After this webinar, again, my name is Nitzan. ADRES clients will receive the certificate automatically. Finally, thank you all of you for participating in our webinar. I wish that it was very helpful for all of you. We invite you for a free Pick Our Brain consulting meeting. If someone is interested, for more information, you can see below over here. Thank you very much for your time, Rivka, and thank you all. Have a good day.
Yeah, and I just also want to share, Nitzan, and to thank you all for being with us for the last 1.5 hours. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed. So I
For
hope
sure.
that we will be in touch in the future. And good luck to all of you.
Thank you.